Proximity functions could include traditional buffering, but usually when we talk about proximity functions, we're talking about how close things are based on a raster grid. So we can see in this example here that the darker away something is in this case, or the further away something is in this case, the darker the shade of gray it's represented as. And this is done on a grid type basis. So each one of those grid cells could have a number associated with it, depending on how far away it is from the triangles in the center. One thing to remember when we're talking about proximity is that not all grid cells are evenly spaced. So for example, if we were looking at this gray area here and we asked ourselves how far any of these other grid cells are away from these gray grid cells, well, because these grid cells measure 10 units by 10 units, it's easy if they're touching along a line, right? This one is 10, this grid cell is 10 units from this gray grid cell, and this grid cell is 10 units from this gray grid cell. Same here with these two. But what if the closest grid cell, for example, this one here, is not next to a gray grid cell, but is catty-corner to one, or it's sharing a node with, it's sharing an edge with one as opposed to a side with one? Then it would no longer be a distance of 10, but based on geometry and the Pythagorean theorem, it would be a distance of 14 in this case here. So we would assign a 14 here. Other places, this grid cell is 2 grid cells away from the gray, so it would be 20, 20 here. But then once in a while we get into a situation like this, 28, because the closest grid cell to this grid cell here that is gray, that is of a gray color, would be this one over here. So we'd actually have to pass through 14 and then another 14, and this grid cell is 28 away.